Hello, my name is Alexia, and I would like to do a quick case brief on the Tinker versus Des Moines case. So, for the plaintiffs, that would be Tinker, and the actual defendant would be Des Moines Independent Community School District. So, for the cause of action, the Tinkers basically filed a petition against with the Supreme Court against the school's banning of armbands, which contradicted the First Amendment right for freedom of speech. And they basically were asking for the ruling that the ban was unconstitutional. So for some facts. So John Tinker, Mary Beth Tinker, Christopher Eckhart, they were all students. And in December of 1965, they wore these black armbands as a symbolic way to protest against the Vietnam War. Well, the Des Moines Independent Community School District didn't really like that because they had a ban, like a basically ban on the black bands. So they didn't allow their students to wear those. That resulted in all these students being suspended because they refused to remove them. So the refusal of removal basically led to these students filing a lawsuit against the school. So their argument was that the symbolic protest was protected for speech. The proceedings basically were the United States District Court supported these actions of the school district for the Southern District of Iowa during the case initial hearing. So the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit heard an appeal from the plaintiffs and upheld this district court's ruling. I would say the issue, for the issue, did the school's, restrictions on people's wearing these armbands, was that a violation of freedom of speech for the First Amendment? The holdings were, the school's prohibition of armbands violated the First Amendment of freedom of speech for the students. And the reasonings for this, there were a few. So by deciding that the school officials are prohibited from controlling student speech unless the student speech was disrupting the class or the school environment or the learning process, then the school is allowed to control the expression. The court set a precedent still citing in free speech cases. So these cases were actually Hazelwood versus, apologies for maybe possibly butchering this, but Coolmere and Morse versus Frederick. Those were some of the cases that the court used. Another reasoning was wearing of armbands was considered a form of symbolic speech protected by the First Amendment. And another one was basically the court found that the school did not have a valid reason for suppressing the students' expression because it was not disrupting the learning environment. I think one of the biggest things about the first reason was, and what it basically emphasized was that if it disrupted the or the environment in the learning process, then the school has, the right to control the expressions of the students. But since it wasn't disrupting the school or learning process environment, then it was not an issue. Lastly, rule of law. So my take on this case was basically that these students were really trying to stand for what they believed in, and they really wanted to protest against the Vietnam War, and they initially thought that these armbands were a great way of expressing that, and I think that, basically the First Amendment right to freedom of speech was that, schools can only limit expression on themselves if it's for a negative reason, meaning, like I said before, if it was disrupting school environment. The decision highlighted that protecting students' constitutional rights in schools is an important aspect of having a stronger educational learning environment. So because this was upheld, I think that this really emphasized that, it was a stronger learning environment.